Go.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to another class of the Neighborhood Bird Project. It's good to have you all here. Um, and the class that we're going to be talking about today, the birds, will be the corvids, the blackbirds, and the woodpeckers. So let's go right to it. I'm going to share my screen, and here we are. All right. So the corvid family is a very large family of birds that include crows and jays and magpies. It's a worldwide family. So in Europe, they get other kinds of corvids called jackdaws and other things like that too. But here, mostly our corvids are ravens, crows, jays, and magpies. But we won't be covering all of those because not all of them occur in Western Washington and especially not in Neighborhood Bird Project Park. So we'll start with the ones that are common, and this is the first one we're going to start with, which is American crow. So we think we all know what crows look like, and I suppose we do in a way. But there's still more to kind of discuss about them. One of the things that seems to kind of be an on again, off again thing is in Washington State, is there another kind of species of crow called the Northwest crow? Um, and I think the latest is, I don't always keep track that well, but I think the latest is that no, we don't have a Northwest crow anymore. It's been lumped in with the American crow. So the main difference between Northwest crows and American crows always has been that Northwest crows are much smaller and their voices are a little bit higher pitched. They're a little easier to find in along the outer coast, especially on the Olympic Peninsula. And the American crows are usually a little bit bigger and a little bit deeper voiced and ubiquitous throughout the country, really. Um, so I think what's going on, this is just my little theory about this, is that years and years ago, before we had cities in the state, when it was just the indigenous people here, I think that there was a population of American crows that got itself over to the outer coast of the Olympic Peninsula and then was isolated from the gene pool of the other American crows. And over time, they started becoming a separate species. They were speciating with each new generation. But then, before they could really become a species all on its own, people showed up who built cities and suburbs and whatnot. And crows, as you know, are very people friendly. They're kind of like avian people in a way. They like the same kind of foods that we do, and they're very happy to be around us. In fact, they take advantage of the habitat that we provide for them. And it our culture spread to the point where we connected the population of crows on the outer coast to the populations elsewhere, and the gene pool started mixing again. So you can still see a lot of very small crows in Seattle, but they're not considered to be a separate species. So what are the field marks of an American crow? And you can see here this very robust bill with feathers that go across the top of the bill here. Very kind of flat head, brownish eye. Notice the chin here is pretty smooth. That's going to be a difference with ravens that we'll see in a minute here. Otherwise, very black feathers. This is kind of what I call a utility bird. It's very generalized. So its wings are good size but not huge. They're wide sort of but not super wide. The tail is long but not super long. The bill is robust but not super specialized. So these birds, when you see a bird like this, then you have to start thinking of an omnivore that can inhabit many different ecosystems, and that's exactly what this crow does. So here's what the front looks like. Just pretty much black all over, black legs and toes as well. Every once in a while, you will see an American crow with some odd white patches on its feathers. It's not leukocytic, meaning it's not genetic. It's we don't really know what causes some of these white feathers. We think in some cases it has to do with diet, that they're not getting the chemicals they need to produce enough melanin to color all their feathers. It might have a genetic component to some extent. We're not really sure. It seems sometimes be connected to age. Um, but anyhow, don't be surprised if you see a crow now and then with some odd white feathers. The It's not a field mark in the sense that it's not connected to the species. And the way you can tell that is the white is usually very random. Whereas if it were a real field mark and a diagnostic feature of a species, it would be symmetrical. So American crow. Here's the back. You can see it's got a little bit of pattern if you look very carefully in good light, but otherwise just pretty black. This is what an immature looks like. They have these beautiful pale blue eyes and pink lips. This is something that you can see now and then. So this is a young crow off the nest. He still looks kind of ratty because it's still a young one. And here's the crow's family. So crows, unlike almost any other bird, will have multi-generational members of the same family helping to raise the next generation. Usually females, we think, that do this. So crows are very smart, and this is one evidence of it. Here's what it looks like in flight. So you can see that it has what I call finger feathers. This is very characteristic of birds that do a lot of soaring. So like eagles have this kind of feather arrangement. And so do vultures. It's usually an indication of a bird that spends a lot of time soaring in long distance. And the reason is that as the bird is flapping its feathers down, it sends little vortices of air that help give it lift. And when you have these little finger feathers like this, the vortices spin off in small amounts, and that tends to reduce drag. So usually this is a sign of a bird that does a lot of soaring without a lot of flapping. Why crows are like that, I have no idea. I've never been able to figure that out. They don't seem to need that, and yet that's what they've got. Oftentimes when these birds are flying through the sky, what I want you to do is study what they look like from a distance. They look, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it's a little bit of like an oar movement, like rowing with oars. It looks like from a distance, or sometimes even kind of a little fluttering sort of look. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but it's very characteristic of the way these birds fly. Otherwise, mostly they fly straight, although sometimes they play in the air too, and will drop down and circle around with each other and so on. Here's something that you often see with crows. Harassing predators, in particular eagles. So you'd think the eagle with his great big bill would dominate, because all it would have to do is just grab the crow and that would be the end of the crow. But the crows are so maneuverable and so fast that the eagle really stands no chance. So oftentimes when crows spot an eagle, they will start cawing to each other and draw in other crows, and the next thing you know, this poor eagle is being dive bombed by multiple crows until it gets driven off. So that's a behavior that is quite common. Here's some of that white feathers that I was telling you about. So let's listen to, crows have many different calls, and I haven't lined them up here, so hang on a second while I do this. Not even sure I have blackbirds here. No, I don't think I did that. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to get calls here for you today. My apologies. Someone's playing a crow. Play a song. Well, this is not working, so I'm sorry about that. Anyhow, we'll go back here. Yeah, thanks for whoever played that cawing sound. This is a famous alki crow. I don't know if it's still alive or not, but this, every once in a while you'll see, very rarely, an all pale brown crow like this. This has a special name. This is called a caramel crow. So if you spot one of those, let everybody else know, because that would it's an interesting color variation. It doesn't have enough melanin in it, and this is genetic. All right. So the only other bird that you would really confuse a crow with is a raven. And ordinarily in Seattle, we don't have to worry too much about ravens. In Washington State, they tend to be more of a rural bird, or else more common in eastern Washington. But there's been a pair of ravens breeding in Discovery Park for years now, and a few years ago, a couple of them went over to the Arboretum and started breeding there too. And in fact, in January, I saw two of them doing their courtship flight above Husky Stadium. So now we have to understand about how ravens are different from crows. So this is the coloration is pretty much the same. If you were to look at the bill of a raven, it's much heavier than a crow, but that's hard to see if you're just looking at a single bird. Ravens typically have a lot of kind of rough feathers under their throats here, otherwise very similar to crows. Here's the ruff I was telling you about, which crows don't really have that. And then the diagnostic field mark, if you're just looking at a single one, is the tail. So the tail is a cruciform, meaning it has a shape like this, and then it goes back again like this, sort of like a diamond shape. When it's folded up like this and the bird is just sitting, that can be a little bit hard to see, but a crow would have a straight across tail like here. So that's diagnostic field mark. So this is what a raven looks like when he's in full flight.
Connie, you said cruciform when I think you meant to say cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped.
Yeah, that's true, but I meant cruciform too, sort of like a T shape. But you're right, cuneiform is a better word. All right, so here's this big, big bill, and then the ruff under the throat. When a bird is on the ground like this, you can't really tell much about the tail. There's the cuneiform shape of the tail. So that is diagnostic. In this particular picture, we can see that the bird is molting. It's molting one of its flight feathers here, which it could be doing just as a regular sort of thing, because birds do molt their feathers once a year. Or it could be that it had an accident and lost one of its feathers. Hard to tell. This is probably an accident, because usually when they're molting in the way they're supposed to, it's symmetrical, and we don't see any of that over on this side. This is a juvenile raven, common raven. So the juveniles look just like the adults, except they're more brownish. And here's one calling. Here is the two birds in silhouette, the crow in front and the raven behind, and you can see what I'm talking about here. There's a huge size difference. Crows are much, much smaller than ravens. Ravens are about the size of red-tailed hawks. They're just huge in comparison. It doesn't help you much if you're just looking at a single bird. Then the size doesn't really come out and smack you in the face. But if there's a crow around, and there might be, because the crows do like to harass the ravens when they see them, then you can see the size difference. But then also look at the tail there, and you can see the difference in shape that I was telling you about. So here the crow's tail ends square, and here it's cuneiform or cruciate. If the birds are not maneuvering with their tails and they've got their tail feathers all folded up, you're not going to see that very well. So when that happens, you just kind of have to wait and follow the birds with your binoculars until they open up their tails, and then you can see the shape. In the same way, if they've spread their tails wide open, you can't see the shape either. So it has to kind of be midway. But if you're patient, usually you can see that eventually. Here's the size difference. So you can see crows 16 to 21 inches for body length, and the ravens are 22 to 30 inches. So the wingspans are hugely different. Look at that. Here's a comparison of their heads, and you can see what I meant when I said that the raven has a very robust bill. It's much more robust than the crow, and the crow is pretty robust too. Both of them have feathers that go across the top of their upper mandibles. But the raven's head is just kind of, it just looks like more scraggy somehow. And I think it's because there is more featheration on the upper mandible and especially on the throat. crows just smoother all around. All right, here's another corvid. This is quite a common one. This is our Steller's jay. So Steller's jays have robust utility bills. Once again, these corvids are omnivorous. A little bit of blue, like sort of like a little accent on their foreheads a little bit. Some of them have more of that than others. Some of them really don't have it at all. Then they've got a crest, and the whole head and going down to the nape and in the throat, all the way to the back almost, is black. And then the rest of them is blue. So the blue of the wings is patterned a little bit with bars, a little bit of barring on the tail, but otherwise it's just this gorgeous blue. So one of the things to tell you about this coloration is the black of the head of the Steller's jay is supplied by pigment. The blue is not. The blue is supplied by refraction. So you have to look at the underlying structure of the feathers, which are acting like a little bit like prisms to break up the light and return it to our eyes in the shade of blue, just like the sky is blue because of the air molecules. So the same kind of principle applies. So this blue color can look quite dark sometimes and not even very blue in shadow. It's very dependent on how much light is getting refracted and where the refraction is going to your eyes. So here you can see this one is a darker bird. They have the power to raise their crests up like this if they feel like it. It's clearly some kind of way of communicating. I don't know if they do it to communicate to other birds in particular or specifically, or whether it's just sort of something that they do because, wow, they're making a comment. But usually it's when they're alarmed. So this one has a stick in its bill, and if you see that, you can figure out that it's collecting nesting material. So what these jays do, these Steller's jays, they'll break off branches like this with their bills. They'll just snap it right off and then carry that back to make their nest. Here's those little kind of, they're not eyebrows, they're just sort of, I don't know, accents, I guess you could say. You can see what the chin looks like is that the black pigment going down to the breast where it sort of fades off, and then blue all the way down to the undertail coverts, and then the undertail is black. Here's, if you were looking at Steller's jays in the Rocky Mountains, they would have a lot more blue up here as this one does, but this one is not in the Rocky Mountains. This one is actually one of our local Steller's jays. So sometimes we can get that too. Notice that the black goes onto the back. Here's another view of the back of a Steller's jay. Males and females look pretty much the same. Isn't that a beautiful picture? So this one is about to land, spreading out all its feathers and its wings and also its tail. This is a very characteristic pose for when this bird flies. So the flying pattern of a Steller's jay is it will spread out its wings very broadly, and its tail too oftentimes, and flap a few times and then glide. So quick flaps, a few of them, and then just gliding, and then more quick flaps. That's a very characteristic flight pattern for this bird. This is what the juvenile looks like. Same as the adult, but just gray, or sort of, I guess you could say brownish, very pale. Also, it's got this pink by the gape there. So I have never seen one of these in the wild. Have any of you, Bill, have you ever seen one of these, a juvenile? All right, here's our other jay. This is California scrub jay eating its favorite food, which is acorns. It's not going to swallow the acorn whole. Instead, it will pick up the acorn and peck it with its utility bill until it pecks off the shell, and then it will eat the insides of the acorn. This one is not about to eat it, though. This one is about to cache it. And what these scrub jays will do is they'll hide it somewhere, their acorns, and then try to remember where the acorns are put. This particular bird decided to hide it in grass right by the parking lot of the Center for Urban Horticulture, and then to cover up the acorn with a leaf. So I don't think that acorn was lasted for the whole winter for this bird. So this is a utility bill, once again, very robust, and then beautiful cerulean blue head with this dramatic white thin supercilium that looks like an eyebrow, a little bit of blue on the chin, and I should say above the chin. The chin itself is white. Then kind of got this symphony of cerulean blue mixed in with some gray. Here's another view here. So, and then blue again on the wings and tail. The belly here and breast can be white like this, or more commonly a little bit washed with gray. So I think this is kind of more an effect of the photograph. This is a little bit more common here. So you see the white of the chin going down as a kind of almost like an old-fashioned tie. And then like an ascot, I suppose, and then gray belly, really. So these birds are non-migratory. They're California birds that have been gradually moving their territory northward, sort of like the house finches did, same kind of strategy. And I'm guessing maybe by the 70s they had crossed into the Brady Loop area where they were breeding, and they've just been pushing their territory northwards. When they got to Seattle, usually you could see them only in very small numbers and in winter, and then not for the rest of the season. But now I think they are breeding in Seattle. Their favorite part of the city seems to be Ballard. I have no idea why. They showed up at the Phil very sporadically and in tiny numbers for years. I was so jealous of Ballard. But then one year there was a big acorn crop. That's the first I ever knew how many oak trees we had in the neighborhood. It was a huge number of oak trees. And we had, I think, something like 8 of these show up and stay for the winter. And I thought, at last we've got our California scrub jays. I don't have to be jealous of Ballard anymore. But then the next year they went away. However, 2 years ago, a pair of them attempted to nest in Yesler Swamp. So I think we're just going to see more and more of that kind of thing going on. And so you have to be on the lookout for these birds. They're just going to get to be more common as time goes on. That nest, I believe, did fail, but I think they'll try again. Here's one that doesn't show that gray as much, so a little bit of variation there. California scrub jay. There's one hiding his acorn, or her. You can't tell the. This is an example of how omnivorous they are. So this one has caught some kind of insect, or I think it's a cricket. Here's the back. Isn't it beautiful? Honestly, you can see that the cheek patch here is gray, but darker gray than this sort of dove gray back, and I don't know, just gorgeous bird, really. Here's what it looks like in flight. So one of the things to notice with these birds when they fly is this combination of, you see just a flash of blue and then this pale underparts here, but a disproportionately long tail. That really stands out. This is what the immature looks like, the juvenile. So kind of scruffy looking, blue on the tail, but not too much, not too much else blue anywhere else. Okay, let's do some blackbirds now. So when I was taking the master birder class, we had an expert blackbird man come and talk to us, and he said, just remember, not all blackbirds are blackbirds, and not all blackbirds are black birds. So I've remembered that. So he's right about that. Most blackbirds are black, but western meadowlarks are classified as blackbirds, and they are not. So this is the most common one in our part of the world. This is the red-winged blackbird. In terms of the Neighborhood Bird Project, I think you're going to not see these in every one of the parks. They like to nest in cattail marshes, but they're not confined to cattail marshes. So at the Phil, for example, yeah, that's where they nest for sure. But in the wintertime, they'll wander around a lot and get out into the neighborhood. So far away from the marsh, really, and into riparian habitat, even woods, kind of dense woods habitat. So I don't know in the other Neighborhood Bird Project parks whether you get these or not, but I'm guessing that if you have any kind of cattails, like at Discovery, for example, that these would show up. So I'm going to go over them. This is what the male looks like. The blackbirds have this very typical, very pointy, kind of longish bill. In the case of this red-winged blackbird male, black all over, except right here, these are called epaulets, and they're orange on the top and then a little bit of yellow underneath. Otherwise, the bird is just totally black everywhere. Here's that very sharp, pointy bill. Here's another view of the front of this bird. Here's one taking off, so you can see even the underwings are black. So these blackbirds have the ability to spread out these epaulets. They can actually point them out to the side a little bit, and they do that to be aggressive. So they're very aggressive birds, and they will do this to rivals, and also it's a way for them to attract females. I actually was sitting in my car one time over at Magnuson, and one came and perched on my car, on the door of my car, and started pecking like crazy in the mirror because he saw his reflection and he didn't like what he saw. So that happens sometimes. They will chase each other all over. The males establish territory in the marshes first, and then they try to fight off all comers. And sometimes they'll fight with females too, and it's just they're just fighting all the time. A lot of times, especially in the wintertime, they'll have some rusty feathers on their backs, but that varies from individual to individual. So look at that bill. So I want you to study that. That's very much a blackbird bill. You can see it's pretty symmetrical. It's good sized. It's not a dinky bill, but it's not, we're not looking at a woodpecker here, and very pointy. Here's a beautiful picture in flight. Wow. Red-winged blackbird. So the males are unmistakable, especially because we don't get any variations in such as tricolored or bicolored. We get this with the orange or reddish orange epaulets, and then with a trailing edge of yellow, pale yellow. The females can fool you. So here's the female, and she's got the typical blackbird look. I mean, she's got this sort of symmetrical bill, very pointy, but otherwise she's very brown and mottled, very cryptically colored. And the problem with these females is they can have different shades of brown. So this is the most common shade of brown. It's sort of a medium brown, and then oftentimes a little bit of yellow on the lores or even below the gape. And then some rusty feathers, oftentimes on the back or in the tertials, or sometimes in some of the coverts on the wings. It can vary considerably. Some of them don't. Some females don't have that at all. And then this supercilium here really stands out. It sort of starts at the front of the eye and gets quite wide and goes back, but otherwise very streaky on the crown and on the nape and so on. So that's very typical. Here's a female yelling. And you can see her wing is open here, and you can see how much rust is on that wing. That is highly variable. This part of her is also quite variable, so it's very stripy, but the stripes are short little stripes and kind of piled one on top of another, and they're on a background, so they can be blackish or they can be dark brownish, and the background color here is sort of whitish or kind of cream, but that background color can vary too. Sometimes it can be fairly white, other times it can be even dirtier than this one looks. So the color variation is what can really fool you, I think. Look at that one. I mean, honestly. So here she is. This one looks so much plainer than the other ones we saw, and the brown is a different color of brown. She's not as stripy on the head, or streaky, I should say. It's just, oh my goodness. So what do you do when you see something like that? And the answer is you start at the bill, and you ask yourself, who has a bill like this? It's not a finch bill. Remember, with the finches, the culmen is usually a little bit curved, and the bill is asymmetrical. There's not the same amount on the upper mandible as on the lower mandible, and it's not pointy. So we're looking at an isosceles triangle here, and a fairly acute one. That's very typical for blackbirds. So we start with that, and then we think, okay, It's not a it's not a sparrow. It's not a finch. So what else is like this? And it's bigger too than the sparrows and finches. So it's a little bit like robin size, maybe a little bit smaller than a robin, but in that same kind of general category. So who has that kind of a pointy symmetrical bill? And then you start thinking blackbird, and that gives you the clue to what you really want to say this bird is. Then you start seeing other field marks like this bit here, which is orange, and we wish it were yellow, but it's not. And then this supercilium, which is kind of, I would say, diagnostic, I guess you could say. And the fact that it's just not very streaky, well, we're just going to have to disregard that. So here's another one. See, it's just so different looking. So she has actually a kind of a little bit of a crown stripe. We don't like that very much. But otherwise, she's pretty typical. So she's got a little bit of orangey, yellowy by the lower, and then a little bit by the gape, and a little bit under the chin here, a little bit on the wings, and then these little short stripes that sort of line up, but sort of not, but dark on a lighter background. But look at that bill. Bill is very typical. This one is pale on top and dark underneath. So once again, there's this color variation can really throw you. So I always start at the bill, and that helps me so much to distinguish a bird like this from a finch. Isn't that a beautiful picture? Wow. Yeah, really pretty. Female red-winged blackbird. This is immature male, and you can see that he's just beginning to get some epaulets here. So this is later on in the year. This would not be an August picture. A little bit reminiscent of the female in that he's got stripes on the belly here. He's turning a lot black here, so this one wouldn't probably fool you too much if you were familiar with this plumage at all. But younger males wouldn't have so much black here. It'd be more mottled, but it's mostly black on white stripes. Here you go. So this is immature male, red-winged blackbird. Got the blackbird bill, the supercilium here, streaky on the head, streaky on the nape, and then these little short stripes on the breast and belly. But don't be fooled, because this does not look even reminiscent of a female, because the colors are black and cream. Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, this would be a tough one, wouldn't it? So we look at this bill and we see it's not as symmetrical as we would like, but it is very, very pointy, and it's the right size and so on. We got the streakiness on the head. We're missing the supercilium. We wish that it came out a little bit more, but it doesn't. Streaky everywhere on the nape, and then stripy with these short little stripes on the belly, all the way down to the flanks here, and then fading out on the undertail covert. So a little bit of hint of red right there. That's gonna help you. So red-winged blackbird. I think like a young male. Here is a female on the left feeding her chick on the right. So this is in late August probably, and this is an example of what the juveniles look like. This is probably going to be a male, I'm thinking, because of the black on the belly here, the little black stripes. But notice that the size difference. So the female is smaller than this chick. And this is a common thing with birds of many different species. The parents will overfeed the young just before they kind of boot them out onto their own. And they do that to give the first-year birds the best chance at surviving, because these birds are they're not exactly clueless. Their DNA tells them what to do. It tells them that they're supposed to fly. It tells them that they're supposed to roost at night. It tells them what food to eat, and so on and so forth. But they're also on a learning curve, and the mortality rate for these first-year birds of all species is very high. As I say, the red-winged blackbirds are extremely aggressive, and here's one driving off a crow. This is a common behavior that you see with red-winged blackbirds. They're one of the few birds that will actually make crows go away. Here's a brewer's blackbird, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time with brewer's blackbirds because they're not very common in our parks. They used to breed at Mount Lake Phil, but they don't do that anymore. But the males are pretty much, they're sort of iridescent, blackish, purplish all over, but they've got this pale yellow eye that's diagnostic. Blackbird bill. Here's the female. Females can fool you if you see one. They look so plain, and they might make you start thinking about cowbirds. But then we're starting with the bill here, and we're going to get this very acute isosceles triangle with the bill. The females of Brewer's blackbirds have dark eyes. Here's one in the snow. This is a male. You can tell by the light eyes. Okay, so I did ask around to find out if Brewer's blackbirds show up at places like Discovery and Genesee. They do like to be out in open areas. And the report was that I don't believe they've ever been seen at Genesee, but they have been seen at Discovery. So it's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. At the Phil now, they haven't. They used to be quite numerous when they were breeding, but the hedge where they were breeding was cut down, and they didn't breed there anymore. They still don't breed there, but every once in a while you'll see them in the wintertime in flocks of starlings and blackbirds. So red-winged blackbirds. So that it's something to kind of keep in mind. This is another blackbird. It's surprisingly enough, this is the western meadowlark. You can see it's kind of got the blackbird bill. It's very, very distinct, though. You wouldn't mistake this bird for anything else. So stripy on the head, brown and white, yellow lores, yellow throat, this dramatic black kind of pectoral arrangement, yellow belly all the way down to the undertail coverts, which are kind of whitish but with little streaks. The back is here's another one. This amount of black here can fade in the wintertime, and the yellow can also fade quite a bit in the throat and the belly, so they can look kind of washed out. Here's a front view of one. I'll show you the back in a second. One of the diagnostic field marks, aside from this dramatic front, is the white outer tail feathers. That shows up well in flight. Here's what the back looks like. So the back is very cryptically colored, and honestly, if these birds don't want to be looked at, they will sometimes turn their back to you in the grass, and then you kind of lose sight of where they are. Can't even see them. Here's the stripy head, brown and beige, and then very cryptically colored top parts, and then these white outer tail feathers are very noticeable in flight. Here's another one singing. You can see how cryptic the back is. Western meadowlark. Look at that. So this is kind of how you see them a lot, kind of crouched down in the grass. They can be very hard to spot. So this is in the wintertime, the yellow kind of fades out on the belly. You just see a trace of it here. The black pectoral arrangement kind of gets dim also. There's one in the grass. Very hard to see. I don't know about what you see in other parks, but at the Phil, western meadowlarks pretty much are winter birds. This is a winter bird, a winter western meadowlark. You can see how much it's faded here. Okay, now we come to cowbirds, brown-headed cowbirds. So this is the male. And you can see the bill is quite different, really. It's not quite as pointy. It's a little bit more robust, not the isosceles triangle quite so much. Brown head, which can be difficult to see in some lights. It looks just dark sometimes. And then sort of iridescent black on the back and on the belly. Here's the iridescence that I was telling you about. Brown-headed cowbird. So these are summer birds. They arrive in April usually. They are not welcomed by birders because they do not build their own nests. These are parasite birds. They look around for other birds' nests, and when they find one, they wait until the birds leave it, and then they go and the female goes and lays one of her eggs in that nest, and hopes then that the original parents will not kill her egg, or push it out, and will raise it as their own, which about 30 or more different species in Washington do. So the only bird that I know of that can recognize the cowbird egg, which does look quite different from other birds' eggs. It's usually bigger and differently colored, but somehow our birds don't recognize it, except for the red-winged blackbirds. They will recognize it and pierce the eggs and push them out. So when that happens, the cowbirds get mad and they'll wait around and try again. And sometimes they'll attack the red-winged blackbirds too. This is a typical posture for the male brown-headed cowbird. Kind of head up, wings down, tail kind of stuck out. This one is posturing in front of the female. So these male brown-headed cowbirds are unmistakable if you can get them in good light. You can see here the brown head. But the females, oh my goodness, the females can really fool you, and so can the first year, the immatures in the fall. So we start with the bill here, and this is a poor angle here. The bill is a little bit more drawn out than this, but still pretty robust. It looks sort of halfway between a blackbird bill and a sparrow bill. Flat head, very plain face and head, and plain all over, really. I mean, there's not many field marks to tell you. A little bit of stripy, mottly business going on the chest and down the flanks and the belly. But it doesn't seem like much, honestly. She's just one of the hardest birds to identify, I think. So here's a male posturing with other males looking on and pestering the female. You can see here's her little bit of stripiness in the underparts, but not dramatic. There's nothing dramatic about her. She's just very, look at that. Just plain. So how do you even tell one? And I think what you have to do is you just have to go by the bill. So you look at that and you think, is that a finch? I mean, that's sort of a finch bill. The culmen is curved, and it's a little bit too symmetrical maybe for a finch, but hey, I could talk myself into finch. But then I look for some of the other field marks of, let's say, house finch, for example, and remember the smudgy stripes on the flanks and the breast here. There's no sign of that here on this bird, so you have to start thinking of something different. Not a finch, a cowbird. She's looking almost pretty here, isn't she? Plain throat. So, yeah, I'm into nondescript birds, and I have to say that this one is kind of attractive to me. But I dislike the fact that they parasitize. They become a problem in our state. Mostly because they are now going into heavy forest habitat they never penetrated before. They don't like the forest. They won't go in very far, but our logging practices, where we'll log like a patchwork quilt, have created much more edge surfaces, and the cowbirds are taking advantage of that. This is what you see sometimes in late August or early September. This is when you find out how successful the cowbirds have been at parasitizing. So this is a very common sight where you'll see a small bird, in this case a chipping sparrow, feeding an enormous sort of Godzilla-like creature that it thinks is it's young, and it's not. So this is what a juvenile brown-headed cowbird looks like, very reminiscent of the female, except a little bit more mottled on the head and more mottled on the breast. Here you can see what I mean. And another one. Yeah, let's see, that looks so much like a house finch, doesn't it? Boy, that would be tough. How would you distinguish? I don't think you go by bill color. That's not very consistent. I think you'd have to look at the breast and say, the breast and belly and flanks, and say those are not stripes. Those are more like dots. Dots lined up to look like stripes and fool you, but they're not. They're not stripy. They're broken up. That's a cowbird. You see what I'm talking about here? And then, yeah, difficult ID. But you need to familiarize yourself with it, because you're going to get these in the habitats where we do our counts. Okay, now we're going to do, that finishes up the corvids and the blackbirds, and we're going to do the woodpeckers for the rest of our presentation in this class today. And before we go very far into the woodpeckers, I wanted to show you a video of that might answer one of your questions that you've probably been dying to know, which is how do the woodpeckers bang away at pecking with a force sometimes of 1,000 Gs, multiple times, maybe 1,000 times in a day, and they have any brain left at all? How does that even work? And I'm going to show you what that looks like in slow motion for not one of our woodpeckers. This is a great spotted woodpecker in Europe, but it has the best.
Öyle tanışın. Ağaç kakan.
So we still don't understand exactly how these woodpeckers manage to hit with such force and not scramble their brains, but we do know some things. One of the things we know is they have their nictitating membrane that they close over their eyes just before they hit, and that's to keep the wood chips from going into their eyes. So you can see how the wood chips are flying around. So just before they hit, they close their nictitating membrane. Okay, so that's one adaptation. So I wanted to point out that with these woodpeckers, there are multiple adaptations for them to have this lifestyle. It's not just that they have chisel bills; they have a lot more going on. So let's take a look at that. So the first thing is, notice that the lower mandible is shorter than the upper mandible, and that spreads the force away from the brain and more to the body. So that's one thing to notice. They have special growth cells on the tips of their bills because the bills wear out pretty fast. So they've got to keep their bills in good form. So they grow quite fast at the tip there. That's another adaptation. But the main adaptation, okay, so they've got a tongue. I'm going to stop this here in a second. All right, so they've got a tongue that goes all the way through their bills and then under their skull here, and then it wraps all the way around up to about here. So it's an enormously long tongue. And the fact that it wraps around the skull like that is, it's thought to be somewhat of an adaptation to cushion the blow a little bit and spread the force away from the brain, which is right in here, to the rest of the body. So that's another adaptation. And then still another one is they have a bone called the hyoid bone, which also helps cushion underneath here, underneath the skull, to help cushion the blow and also to spread the force to the rest of the bird's body. They have smaller brains than the average bird, and the brain case is very tight to the brain. So our brains kind of float around inside our skulls, and if we stop suddenly, like in a car crash or something, our skull might stop, but the brain doesn't, and it bangs into the bone of our heads, and that causes brain injuries. That doesn't happen with woodpeckers so much because the skull bones are tight to the brain. And the immediate bones around the brain are spongy, so that helps cushion the bird, sort of like bubble wrap, I guess you could say. The other thing is that their brains are shaped vertical, so that presents less surface area to take the force as the force is banging in here like this. But what most of these adaptations do is they spread the force out from the central part of the bill, which would then impact the brain. They spread it to the sides and top a little bit more, but especially to the sides, and the body takes most of the blow. Well, let's have another look at that. You can see how it's almost in a wave going down the bird's back. So that's, I've got another one to show you. This is our own pileated woodpecker. This is not quite as good a video, but so this is our largest woodpecker. And what you can see a little bit on this is, notice that it too spreads that blow all the way down through its back. There, you can see that. Another thing that these woodpeckers do is, to make it a little bit easier on themselves, is just before they hit, they'll turn their bills a little bit to the side, and that softens the blow a little bit too. So woodpeckers do this kind of drilling for several purposes. They will make nest holes. They all nest in cavities that they drill out themselves. So that's one purpose for this pounding away. Another purpose is not just for nest holes, but they'll make holes to roost in at night. So the holes that they roost in are not the same as the holes they nest in. That's another reason for this drilling. And then the males will repeatedly strike a tree trunk, sometimes a hollow tree trunk, or sometimes even a light post, and they'll make a noise, and that drumming is to drive off other male rivals and also to attract a female. So there was a northern flicker at the Phil one year, and he figured out that if he stood on top of the light standard and drummed above where the light standard met the pole, it made a deep sound, and if he went to the edge of the light standard and drummed there, it made a higher pitched sound. I called him the Beethoven of woodpeckers because he would go did-did-dun, did-did-dun, over and over again. The female was very impressed by this. And of course they will drill also to find insect larvae and grubs. So let's go through the woodpeckers that we're likely to see in our neighborhood bird project. This is the first one. This is the smallest. This is a downy woodpecker. And you can see that the males have this beautiful arrangement of black, white, black, just striping like a zebra, except the stripe behind the eye is wider than the other stripes. A little bit of like furry type feathers covering the bill in the front here. That's very common. Males have this red dot on the back, little bill, and then going on down the bird, in the Pacific Northwest, these downy woodpeckers and hairy woodpeckers too are not spanking white on their underparts. They're a kind of a dirty white. That's a real big difference between our subspecies and the subspecies that you're likely to see east of the Rocky Mountains. Black on the back, but this beautiful sort of white dagger going up the back, spots on the wings, black on the upper tail, and oftentimes with a lot of these birds, there'll be spots on the outer tail feathers that are white. So here's another view of one. One of the things I want you to notice about this bird is the size of the bill. So that is the main way to tell apart downy woodpeckers from hairy woodpeckers. The downy woodpecker bill is dinky. So how do we tell that when we're not really having two of these birds sit right next to each other? And the answer is you measure the bill from the point of the bill to where it joins the feathers, and then you compare that to the width of the head. So if we go to this distance here, we see that if we were to compare it to the head, it would only reach to about here. In a hairy woodpecker rather, it's much longer than that, as we will see. So these bills are very small with the downy woodpeckers. But here you see that sort of dirty white and spots on the wings. This picture is not upside down. No, this is a downy woodpecker hanging upside down, which they can do. And male, once again, you get the little red spot here. These feathers by the forehead here can be a different color, kind of a beigey color. But this dirty white underneath, and then a little bit of spots on the undertail cover it sometimes. That varies from individual to individual. A lot of spots on the wings here. Here's what the front looks like again. So the last stripe is, we call it a whisker. Downy woodpecker. Very strong toes. Can hang upside down for as long as they want to. Another one. Not all of them. A lot of them will have little black spots on the outer tail feathers, but not all of them do that. Here's what the back looks like. So you see this is not really a spot of red. It's more like a little smile of red. And here's the the nape is divided in half with white on either side of a black stripe that runs down the center, and then this white kind of dagger on the back. The tails of all woodpeckers are very stiff, stiffer than the average tails of birds, and they use them to brace themselves when they're up against a tree like this. Another view of the top of the crown. And another one. I like these downy woodpeckers. They're very common in our riparian habitat, and here's what one looks like in flight. You can see it's just when they open up their wings how spotted they are. Just beautiful, beautiful bird. Oftentimes when they're, here's this is one of Greg Thompson's beautiful pictures. Oftentimes when they fly, woodpeckers will fly in a kind of a swooping motion, so they'll kind of go up and down like a sine wave. And that's quite typical. The way they accomplish that is they'll flap for a while, and then they'll put their wings flat up against their sides and glide without flapping, and then they start to go down. Gravity pulls them down, and then when they get down as far as they want to, they'll start flapping again, and then they'll go up. So that gives that kind of S curve. That's very, very typical in these birds' flight. In fact, sometimes if you're looking at a woodpecker, especially a downy woodpecker in flight, that's what will draw your eye, is that pattern of flight. And then you just follow it with your eyes until the bird finally lands, and then you use your binoculars, and sure enough, it's a downy woodpecker. So all the woodpeckers do that, but the downies are the smallest ones to do that. So they're noticeable. Finches do that too, but they're much, much smaller than these woodpeckers. So the female is below the male. Notice in this nest hole, they've made it just big enough to kind of squeeze in, so they don't waste a lot of effort making giant holes. The female looks just like the male, except she tends to have a little bit more spots on the tail here and no red on the back of her head at all. It's just black there. Otherwise, she's quite similar. Here you see these tail feathers on the outer white wing, outer white tail feathers. Beautiful, really. Downy woodpecker. In flight. So you can see what these black spots on the outer white tail feathers look like, and then here's that center kind of dagger. A lot of spots on the wings. Beautiful picture, isn't it? The young look quite similar to the females, but just sort of rattier, kind of fluffier overall. All right, here's the hairy woodpecker, and you can see how similar it looks to the downy. The coloration is very, very similar. We start with a bill here, a chiseled bill, and the diagnostic field mark for the hairy woodpecker compared to the downy is the size of the bill, the length especially. So we're looking at, if we measure from the tip to where the feathers start, and then we kind of duplicate that by starting with the feathers and going back as far as the bill would go, and you can see the bill goes like well behind the eye. It's just much longer than the downy. Downy would end like about here, and it would end about here behind the eye, but the length of the hairy woodpecker's bill is much, much longer than that. Otherwise, black crown, white, black whisker, whitish throat. Like the downies, these Pacific Northwest hairy woodpeckers are kind of a dirty white. The same kind of red smile on the backs of their heads for the males, and otherwise, quite similar. So you really have to study the bills. That's the best way to tell them apart. Hairy woodpeckers are bigger than downies by a considerable amount, but that can be extremely hard to see if you're only looking at one bird. So here is the hairy, the back. Here's the top. You can see how big that bill is. Doesn't that look like a downy? You'd really have to look at that. And this angle doesn't help you very much, but you can see even here the bill is sticking way out. There's this one with his wings spread, a male coming into the nest hole. No white, no dark spots on the outer tail feathers on this one. The female is, as with the downy, looks just like the male except without the red smile on the back of her head. Here's the female leaving the nest. Okay, so here's the comparison. On the left we have the downy, and on the right we have the hairy. And you can see the coloration is pretty much identical, but look at the bills. So it's not like the downy has this, just such a dinky bill that it's not a chisel. No, it is a chisel, but it's just a much smaller chisel. So here is where the feathers start, and we take this bill back, and it only goes like to about here maybe, whereas here with this hairy woodpecker, we take it back, and it goes all the way back to here maybe. So very different. Here's the size difference. So this is a hairy woodpecker on the left and a downy woodpecker on the right. These are eastern hairy and downy woodpeckers. You can tell how, because they're spanking white, but this is a good picture to show size difference. All right, here's our biggest woodpecker. This is a pileated woodpecker, and they're bigger than crows, but not a whole lot bigger than crows. Very big chisel beak. This beautiful sort of woody woodpecker crest, red crest, and then a little bit of white supercilium, then black stripe, white, and then the males have this red whisker here that's not present in the female, and then this last white stripe goes kind of back and then down. Very plain black back, black tail. Here's this is the males, once again, have this red whisker here, but also they have red on their forehead that goes all the way down to where the bill starts. The females would be black here, so it's really quite easy to tell apart males and females, and I urge you to do that every time you see a pileated, because it's fun. You can see that this one has his crest down, so that sometimes the head can look quite round. This is the tongue coming out. So picture the tongue coming out from all the way from here. So let's stick our tongue out. And in the case of these pileated woodpeckers, the tongue is barbed and sticky, so it's sticking its tongue in there, and the grubs that it's after are sticking to the barbs and the stickiness of the tongue. There's another view of a male. Black parts on below, starting with the neck and going all the way back to the undertail coverts. A beautiful male here, isn't that picture? Beautiful. Wow. Here you can see what the underparts look like. So this is an impressive bird when you see it like this because of the red and so on, but it is really impressive when it's in flight, and I'll show you a picture. Here's the female. So you can see she doesn't have red, and no red mustache here, and no red on the forehead. So it's quite easy to tell them apart if you look. Here's her tongue coming out. Here's what the back looks like. Oftentimes with these pileated, when they are excavating, they'll excavate from the side, so you can see she's chipped off a big chunk of bark here. You can tell the pileated's work because their holes and the scars they leave on the trees are really big, and they tend to be almost rectangular in shape, sort of. Here's a female about to come out of the nest. This is what you see when they're in flight. Just so dramatic. Beautiful white wing patches that really show up. A little bit of a leading edge, very narrow of black, but you don't even see that. All you see is just this white surrounded by a trailing edge of black feathers. And if you're in good sunlight, the sun shines right through these white feathers and it makes them look translucent. Look at that. Wow. So dramatically beautiful. These are what the young look like. If these birds are not quite fledged completely yet, they're still growing their flight feathers. If you had looked at them a couple of weeks before this, they wouldn't be so red up here or anything. They'd be kind of more brownish, but they're getting more looking like pileated every day. All right, that's the pileated woodpecker, and here is another woodpecker, a very common one. We call this the northern flicker. So there are two color versions of flickers, the red shafted and the yellow shafted. We get the red shafted here. So red shaft refers to the rachis here that goes up the center of the feather, which is this kind of orangey red. That's what gives it its name. Otherwise, it's a bird that has a kind of a plain face, but these the males anyway have red whiskers here. That's how you can tell males apart from females. Beautiful spots all over the place, so on their wings and especially on their breast, and then this sort of pectoral arrangement here of black, which is very, very prevalent and diagnostic. Nobody else has that. Here's what male looks like from the side, and you can see plain face, a little bit of brown on the front part of the forehead, and then gray in the back, then this sort of dove gray cheek, and going back to the nape and under the chin and so on. But this is this red whisker here. Just think, males have whiskers and females don't. And then very dotty underneath, all the way to the undertail coverts, and then you can see the red shafts here. Here's what one looks like on the top. So once again, this is a male, and the back is not spotted exactly, but to me it always looks like it is because I'm kind of seduced by the spots on the undersides, but really it's more like little broken up bars. Very typical tail. Oftentimes, if one of these flickers perches far away on the top of a tree, and it's sitting there, and you think, what the heck is that? And you're not getting a very good view. And robins like to perch up there, and they have a similar posture, and so then you start to wonder. But even without binoculars, you can see these 2 points on the tail here. It's very typical of woodpeckers, and that even from a very great distance without binoculars, you can see that it's a flicker. Here's what it looks like from underneath again. More orange on the underwing, on the undertail, I should say. This is a diagnostic field mark as well. So they have this kind of a dagger of white on their rumps that goes up to their backs to about here or so. And so if you see one flying away, this really shows up well, and that will tell you what kind of woodpecker you're looking at, because nobody else has that particular kind of white on the rump. If you remember back to the downy and hairy woodpeckers, they have sort of a dagger that goes here, but it's not so centered on the rump. It goes up higher on the back. This is what the female looks like. So very similar to the male, except no whiskers. No red here. And here's what the female looks like without her whiskers. Otherwise, very similar to the male. And you can see these are the young. This picture was taken on a snag, an old dead poplar along University Slough at Montlake Phil. So both parents take care of the young. This is the male who's brought food. You can see that the young ones are looking, the plumage colors are similar to the grown-ups. Look at these 2 points here on the tail. Here's what one looks like in flight, and you can see this big white rump patch here. It really shows up. Here's the female in flight, and she's got that too. So I don't know. I didn't bring you a picture of a yellow-shafted northern flicker. I should have probably. So imagine, if you can, these shafts here being golden yellow, and with the males, the whiskers are black, and there's a little bit of red on like a little smile of red on the back of the head for the yellow shafted. So why am I telling you this when yellow shafted flickers, northern flickers, are an eastern bird? And the answer is that every once in a while we'll get a yellow shafted northern flicker in our part of the world. It doesn't happen very often. It happens about as often as we get any kind of eastern bird wandering over to the Pacific Northwest. So maybe not even as often as something like chestnut-sided warbler, a little bit more rare even than that. However, there was many years ago, and I'm going to say maybe as long ago as 15 or 20 years ago, there was a yellow-shafted flicker male who showed up at Montlake Phil. And he found a mate, a red-shafted female, and they started having young, and then the young had young. And so since that time, we have had what looks like yellow-shafted flickers in Seattle. And oftentimes on tweeters, they'll report, oh, there was a yellow-shafted flicker. Well, you have to look really, really carefully at these ones that look like yellow-shafted northern flickers, because it's highly likely that they're not really a pure yellow-shafted at all, but some progeny from this one guy who got his genes into the gene pool. So what you want to look for is the pure red-shafted males have a red whisker. The yellow-shafted have black. They have no markings on the back of their heads at all. Sometimes the genes come together in such a way that the only difference is there'll be maybe in a hybrid, there'll be maybe just a few tiny little black feathers right in this whisker, and you really got to look at it. So you got to scrutinize these before you say, yes, I've got a yellow shafted. It's not impossible, but it's not very likely. Okay, this is our last woodpecker, and this is the red-breasted sapsucker. So there are many different species of sapsuckers, but this is the one we get in western Washington. Very beautiful bird, really. Woodpecker bill, as all woodpeckers. A little bit of white on the feathers that cover the bill here, unlike the downy and hairy, which were sort of beigey. Very beautiful red forehead going all the way back to the nape, and then the red breast that gives it its name here. The black back with a little bit of white spots here, dramatic white on the wings. And it's not really what you might call a wing bar, because it's going vertically here instead of horizontally, but this really shows up in flight too. A lot of times you'll see a very faint sort of yellow wash on the belly going back a little bit, with a few black stripes thrown in on what would otherwise be kind of a whitish ground. This doesn't always show up, but usually it does. So this is what that looks like here. So beautiful. Isn't that gorgeous? Really, a little bit of a black mask here, but that's not very noticeable in the field. And then there are different subspecies of this red-breasted sapsucker. Our particular kind has this little bit of feathers on the covering the bill, going back a little ways here to the eye. Other subspecies, it would go much further back, so that's just something to point out. It doesn't really affect your identification. It's called a sapsucker because these birds will drill little sap wells into trees like this one. It makes the tree look like a corn cob. And what happens is they drill enough so that the sap starts to flow into these sap wells, and then the bird will go away and wait for the sap to fill in, and then it will come back and eat the sap, or also eat whatever insects happen to be trapped in the sap. It's not the only beneficiary of that food source. Sometimes hummingbirds will come and steal some of this sap as well. But notice again, here's that little bit of pale, I guess we're going to call it dirty white, red all the way on the head and hood, going back to the nape, down the front here to the breast. A little bit of wash here of yellow on dirty white, dramatic white on the wings here, sort of black with a little bit of white thrown in on the back. Here's a picture of one. So oftentimes to me, these birds look messy. And I think it's because there's sort of random white in here. It doesn't look like a pattern exactly. And there's oftentimes a little black thrown in on the red feathers of the head. And the belly looks kind of dirty sometimes. They always look ratty to me, like someone needs to take a comb. But still, they're very beautiful birds. Here's one feeding its young in the nest hole, and you can see this back is patterned a little bit. It's not solid black the way a pileated would be. Here you can see what the top of the head looks like. It's just red all over. Red-breasted sapsucker. Pointy tail, 2 points, just like most woodpeckers. Here's one showing a lot more of white on the back. So there's some variation on that. And then here is what it looks, those dramatic vertical wing stripes look like when the bird is flying. So in flight, this white rump sort of shows up a little bit like a flicker. In this picture, you wouldn't think so. It looks like it's more broken up and so on. But honestly, in flight, if you're seeing this bird flying away from you, and you can tell it's a woodpecker because it's got that sine curve of flying pattern, so you know, well, that's a woodpecker. And then you see that whitish rump, and you think, oh, that's a flicker. But then look more carefully, and you'll see these beautiful white stripes on the vertical white stripes on the wings, and no flicker has that. So, and then the red head. So you can actually, isn't that a pretty picture? You can actually tell these birds apart from flickers in flight quite easily if you look. Here's the underwings, aren't much to write home about, but there you can see how dramatically red sometimes these birds can look, and this has a lot of yellow. There's always a lot of these birds at Nisqually. At the Phil, we get them sporadically. There's usually at least one each year. There used to be one that had a circuit where he had his main sap well tree in a site off the campus, but kitty corner in a place called Tulare. So it was just right across the street on the northeast side. And then he would make a circuit a couple of times a day. He would fly from one tree to the next, all the way down to University Slough, and then he'd come back again through Yesler Swamp. And so if you were patient, you just wait a while, and he would eventually show up. Now I think he's probably not with us anymore. It's a little bit harder to see these red-breasted sapsuckers at the Phil, but still, there's almost always at least one each year. What the underwing looks like, really pretty bird. There's his sap tree. This is what the young looks like. So when it's off the nest, so very reminiscent of the adult, except not much red going on the head. Just a suggestion that it's going to get there. But mostly just gray. But still, this very dramatic white vertical stripe. The only other bird that I know of, a woodpecker, that has that is the Williamson sapsucker, which is an uncommon sapsucker in eastern Washington. There you can see that showing up really well. Now this one does not have much of a wash of yellow, just kind of a dirtyish brown here, so that does vary a little bit. This one has a lot of white on the back, so there's quite a variety here. And that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing here and take questions. And once again, I apologize for not having songs. I won't make that mistake again. So I hope you'll just let that one go. Any questions?
I want to apologize for mentioning cuneiform and cuneate. It turns out those are anatomical terms, and most of the field IDs just say wedge-shaped. So I would have been right back in 1801, but it's fallen out of modern usage. I believe
Connie,
you taught me that, Connie.
Connie, I have a comment or two from earlier. Tony mentioned that he had seen a caramel crow near Golden Gardens last year, and he's also
nice.
had scrub jays, California scrub jays. And Amy Tran asked the question. She said she has seen ravens do barrel rolls in the air, and do crows ever do that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, crows are very acrobatic if they feel like it. I've seen a lot of crows playing in the wind. They like to, they're one of the few birds that seems to really love the wind, and they'll get up there and just fly around, and then they'll fall from the sky and then pick themselves up before they hit the ground and fly around each other and so on. But yeah, they'll fly upside down sometimes too. So
Kristen reported he had seen 5 California scrub jays all at the same time, Kristen, last weekend in the U district.
Yes, in my backyard. It's like, wow, what happened?
That's amazing. Do you have an oak tree?
No, we were feeding peanuts to the Stellar's jays.
Ah.
yeah,
It's like, whoa.
Here's a question.
the scrub jays like peanuts too, and I know a lot of people in Ballard do feed them that. In terms of what the crows are doing, so crows in the wintertime get into vast flocks at night. There used to be, about 10 years or so ago, there used to be a crow roost on Foster Island, and we counted 10,000 crows there. every night. And then in the morning, what would happen is they would disperse throughout the North Seattle and spread themselves out in such a way that each crow was on guard in a kind of a station near enough to another crow so there was line of sight, but also they could hear each other. And they would kind of wait around and look for food and also predators to pester. And then at night they would sometimes gather in very large numbers before going to their roost. So sometimes they would gather at the fill, but other times at Magnuson Park and so on. That's called staging. And then they would all stream off to their night roost. And then for whatever reason, this happens sometimes, the crows just got a notion one year that they didn't want to have that roost anymore. And the 10,000 split up and half of them went down to some roost or other in the Renton area. And the other half found another roost in North Seattle. And John and I were wondering one time, well, where are they going? And we tried to trail them in our car. So I had my head stuck out the window and I would say, turn here, John, turn there, John. And we followed the stream until we hit the lake, and then we lost him after that. So I finally called up the crow expert at the University of Washington, John Marsluff, and I said, just tell me, John, where's the new roost? And he said, well, they're still University of Washington birds. Now they're at the Bothell campus. So that's still true to this day, and that flock has grown even more. When breeding season starts, and it's starting now, they will split up into their pairs. They mate for life. And build a nest. They tend to be quite secretive about their nests, and they become extremely aggressive around their nest site, sort of like barred owls in the same way. And they will attack both people and other crows. And when they do that, especially if they're attacking other crows, it's a very serious thing. I saw this happen one time at the Phil. And a crow, a rival crow came in, and the male crow was defending himself in the nest, and got the intruder crow down on the ground and was trying to peck him to death. It was a fight to the death. I'd never seen that with crows before because they're so social, but in the breeding season, no. So one year they made a nest at the start of Wahkiakum Lane, right next to the lane itself, in a serviceberry tree that wasn't much taller than John, so maybe 8 feet tall. John's not 8 feet; he's 6 feet, but it's low down. And I thought, uh-oh, this is bad news because hundreds of people go to work along that trail. And I thought, well, boy, this is really going to be bad. But those crows were so accustomed to people that they didn't peck anybody as long as everybody left them alone. So that was unusual. But yeah, crows have a lot of very interesting behaviors, and they are extremely intelligent.
Louise, get ready to ask your question. But while you're thinking about it, we had a regular chorus of people saying, oh, brewers, blackbirds, they love parking lots like the Linwood Target, Amy Tran said, Green Lake. Yeah, we see them kind of bopping around underneath cars. Why?
Yes.
They like tarmac.
I don't know. That is very true. If you want to see brewers, blackbirds, go to Kmart or someplace like that and into the parking lot, and they're very common there.
Louise?
Just don't understand that.
Louise Kulzer, are you able to ask your question? It said tail of red wing, not straight across. And I'm not sure I can.
Yeah, one of the photos showed the red wing, and it looked like it had a two-part
blackbird
tail rather than straight across.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It has a kind of a squarish tail.
Anybody else have questions? This is
It's not a field mark. I can check for you if you want and get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Blackbird tail. I'll send it to Elena. She can send it to everybody.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm going to start making a running list of, Connie, how long have you lived here in the Northwest? 30 years?
Oh gosh, no, closer to like almost 70.
Oh, thank you. How many birds were not seen here regularly, but have started to become regulars during your tenure here?
Oh gosh, lots of them. I mean,
I know. We'll make a running list.
And Anna's hummingbird
Anna's
springs to
hummingbird,
mind,
yes.
and house finch and California scrub jays are some of them. But their red-shouldered hawk is getting to be more common now, and just lots of things. It's a complicated situation as our climate changes and as seasons change and so on. I know that National Audubon came out with that study, 3 years or so ago, saying that we've lost 1 billion birds or however many that was.
3 billion.
That's 3 billion. Okay, that's a broad brush because some of the species have increased. So crows are notable among them, for example. So it all depends on each species and first of all, how well it gets along with people, but also how adaptable it is to the things that people have done to the environment. It's more complicated than just that broad brush approach. Even though we have lost a serious number of birds, I'm not arguing with that. It's just we have been beneficial to some species to a very high degree.
Other questions?
I have a question. When you were talking about the red-breasted sapsucker, are there differences between the male and the female?
Not really.
Okay.
Connie, we salute you for your energy and fervor and verve and all those wonderful things.
Well, once again I apologize for no songs because the songs would be helpful in this class. I don't know what I was thinking, but there you have it. Maybe for the test I'll play songs randomly and you can guess. That would be very like me. All right. Well, so what I want you to do in the intervening time here is get yourselves out into the field and look at birds. We've covered corvids now, so study crows. I mean, there's so many things to learn about crows and their anatomy. I mean, just watch the way they walk, for example, like when they lift up their feet. What happens to their toes? Do they curl up their toes when they lift up their foot and then they flatten it out again? And how does that compare with the way that gulls walk? There's all kinds of stuff like that to notice. And the reason I say that is not so that you can make a long list of all the things you know about birds, but more to kind of tune your mind into observing what the birds around us are doing. And the more aware you are of that, the more embedded you will be in that nature, but also it's a way to kind of prepare your mind for when you actually are seriously out in the field counting birds. You'll already be kind of in tune with what you're seeing. So the more that you can do that, the better off you are. And if all you have to study at the moment are pigeons and crows, there's a lot to learn from those birds.
I think we should take a field trip to the Bothell Crow Roost.
That would be fun, all right. Well, they do sometimes stage at Magnuson too. That's a little bit closer, and that's fun to watch too when the crows stage, because you can see their behavior as individuals in a giant flock. Now is not the season for it because they're already pairing up, but that's fun to watch too. So, all right, I'm going to leave you now, and I hope to see you all next week, and have a good week.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy spring.